Chapter 1. Introduction to Wealth and Legacy. On Wednesday, July 29, 1981, Lady Diana Spencer transforms from shy aristocratic teenager into the Princess of Wales before 750 million viewers worldwide. Born into the Spencer family, a lineage older and wealthier than the Windsors themselves, Diana's childhood at Althorp House prepared her for privilege, but not for the suffocating expectations of monarchy. Her wedding to Prince Charles unfolds as a spectacle of unprecedented grandeur. Yet beneath the 25-foot train and diamond tiaras lies a devastating truth. She is marrying a man whose heart belongs to another woman. The chapter establishes the paradox of Diana's position, possessing unimaginable wealth and status, while lacking the fundamental human need for genuine love and acceptance. We witness the opulence of her new life, contrasted against subtle hints of emotional void, Charles's distant demeanor, the institutional coldness of palace life, and Diana's growing realization that she has become a beautiful ornament in a carefully staged production. The fairy tale facade begins cracking even as cathedral bells ring, foreshadowing the tragedy to come. This introduction poses the central question: when you possess everything the world envies, what happens when you discover you've lost yourself in the process of gaining a crown? Wednesday, July 29, 1981. St. Paul's Cathedral, London. Wealth at a certain altitude ceases to be about money. It becomes architecture, ritual, and most dangerously, silence. For Lady Diana Spencer, that silence has always echoed through the corridors of Althorp House, her family's ancestral estate, where portraits of powdered ancestors watch from shadowed walls, and the lawns seem too perfect to belong to the living. But on this morning, the silence shatters under the thunder of carriage wheels and the roar of a million voices. The world remembers a fairy tale, but beneath the layers of ivory silk taffeta and the Spencer tiara, a diamond heirloom that has adorned aristocratic heads for generations, walks a 19-year-old girl stepping into a machinery of state that has ground down stronger spirits than hers. Diana is not Cinderella plucked from ashes. She is a Spencer. Her bloodline predates the Windsors, her family's wealth vast and landed, built on centuries of service to the crown. Yet standing at the threshold of St. Paul's Cathedral, surrounded by European royalty and political elite, the grandeur feels less like coronation and more like beautifully orchestrated containment. The bells of St. Paul's Cathedral tremble through the London morning, gilding the city in sound. Outside, a million faces press against barriers, their cheers rolling like a living tide through narrow streets. Inside the glass carriage, Diana moves a gloved hand to the window, watching the blur of flags, flowers, and hopeful eyes. The dress that spills around her like a cloud is worth more than most houses. Its 25-foot train coils at her feet, heavy with silk and expectation. On her head glitters the Spencer tiara, diamonds passed from ancestor to ancestor, worn by brides who married for alliance and duty, not romance. At Althorp, where she grew up, wealth never shouted. It whispered through paneled libraries and manicured lawns, through the way staff moved silently in the background, and guests spoke in lowered voices about Parliament, shooting weekends and connections at court. As a little girl, Diana danced alone in echoing halls, her mother gone, her parents' marriage broken under the same social pressures that now hover around her own future. She learned early that privilege did not insulate hearts from shattering, it only ensured those hearts broke behind closed doors. The carriage stops, a footman lowers the step, and sunlight explodes off uniforms, camera lenses, gold braid. Diana's father, Earl Spencer, waits at the base of the cathedral steps. His eyes shine with pride and something else, regret, perhaps, or warning. He offers his arm. "You look magnificent, darling," he murmurs. She smiles, shy but luminous. "Do I?" she asks, as if unsure which role she is meant to play. Girl, daughter, bride, symbol. Together they begin the long walk into the cathedral. The air is thick with incense and history. Kings and queens have been crowned beneath this dome, heroes remembered, empires mourned. Today, the building has been transformed into a stage for a global audience. The organ thunders to life, and Diana begins her journey down the endless aisle. Each step carries the weight of centuries, Spencer expectations, Windsor demands, and the crushing hope of a nation desperate for a love story. Charles waits at the altar in his naval commander's uniform, every button gleaming, every crease perfect. His expression is correct, controlled. As Diana approaches, her eyes fall for an instant to his cufflinks, tiny interlocked C's, Camilla's gift. Camilla's initials. Even here, at their wedding altar, she is present. The Archbishop's voice booms, ancient words binding these two people, not just to each other, but to an institution older and more demanding than any human relationship. When her turn comes, she stumbles over Charles's many names, the congregation chuckling politely. For a moment, the illusion cracks, revealing a nervous girl beneath the diamonds. She omits the word obey from her vows, a quiet rebellion few notice in the flood of spectacle. Later, on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, Diana steps into the blinding roar of the crowd. 100,000 voices become one, chanting for the kiss, the moment of human intimacy they feel entitled to witness. Charles hesitates, self-conscious, then bends to brush his lips against hers. The scene is captured from every angle, instantly immortalized as the crowning image of a new golden age. Inside, the palace corridors are cool and hushed, gilded ceilings, priceless paintings, carpets woven to cradle royal footsteps. Diana walks between courtiers who speak in polished tones about schedules and duties, her new name, Her Royal Highness, the Princess of Wales, rolling off their tongues like a title and a verdict. In a quiet room, she finds a moment alone, standing before a mirror. The dress is still perfect, the tiara flawless, yet something in her eyes has already changed. Charles appears in the doorway, already changed into evening wear, his attention elsewhere. The reception went well, he says, his tone suggesting he's checking items off a list rather than discussing their wedding day. Everyone seemed pleased with the arrangements. Charles, are you happy? About today, I mean, about us? He pauses, considering the question as if it were a diplomatic inquiry rather than a wife's plea for reassurance. It was a successful event, Diana. The monarchy needs these moments of celebration. The people need to believe in something beautiful. But what about what we need? We are not private citizens anymore, Diana. Our needs are secondary to our duties. You'll understand in time. He leaves her sitting by the window, and the room feels larger than before. The palace, for all its gilded ceilings and priceless art, has too many corners where someone like her can disappear without anyone noticing. She presses her forehead against the cool glass, looking down at the courtyard where crowds had cheered just hours earlier. In a single day, she has inherited palaces, jewels, titles, and a place in history books yet unwritten. The world will remember this as the day she gained everything. But Diana, though she cannot yet name it, has lost something equally valuable: the right to be ordinary, the freedom to make mistakes in private, the luxury of being loved simply for herself rather than for what she represents. Wealth at this level is not liberation. It is a golden cage with bars made of expectation and duty. As night settles over Buckingham Palace, one quiet, dangerous truth takes shape like a shadow at the corridor's end. When the entire world believes your life is a fairy tale, where will you hide when it begins to become a tragedy? Chapter 2. The Rise and the Initial Struggles. By September 1984, Diana has evolved from nervous bride into a global phenomenon, her natural warmth and emotional accessibility revolutionizing public perceptions of royalty. The births of Prince William and Prince Harry fulfill her dynastic duty, yet motherhood becomes both sanctuary and torment as royal obligations constantly separate her from her children. This chapter explores the widening chasm between Diana's public triumph and private despair. Her hospital visits and charity work generate unprecedented public devotion, but this very success breeds resentment within the palace and jealousy from Charles, whose own engagements are overshadowed by his wife's star power. Behind the scenes at Kensington Palace, Diana battles bulimia and self-harm, using food as a language for pain she cannot otherwise express. Charles's emotional distance hardens into cold dismissal, his relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles an unspoken constant that poisons every interaction. Diana's attempts to discuss their failing marriage are met with accusations of hysteria and instability. The chapter culminates in a devastating late-night confrontation where Diana finally voices her knowledge of the affair, only to be told that royal mistresses are traditional and expected, a moment that shatters her remaining illusions about love, duty, and her place in this ancient institution. Saturday, September 15, 1984. Kensington Palace, London. 4 years into marriage, Diana has learned to navigate palaces the way others move through crowded streets, head high, pace steady, pain hidden beneath practiced composure. Kensington Palace, KP in courtier shorthand, serves as her official residence, grand enough to humble, yet intimate enough to remind her she lives in someone else's history. The morning light spills across parquet floors where forgotten princes once played, and now Prince William and Prince Harry race down corridors, their laughter the only genuine sound in rooms heavy with tradition. Publicly, Diana is ascending. Her hospital visits and charity work electrify the press and public alike. When she kneels beside AIDS patients, touching hands that others fear to hold, photographers explode in storms of flashes. Headlines call her revolutionary, an angel, a saint, but within palace walls, another word whispers through the corridors: problem. Her emotional candor unsettles an institution built on restraint, and her stardom casts shadows over a husband meant to be the sun. In the nursery, Diana sits cross-legged on the floor, building blocks with 3-year-old Harry, while William gallops a toy horse along the skirting board. She wears jeans and a soft cashmere jumper, a deliberate rejection of royal formality in her private moments. "Careful, darling. You'll bring down the whole kingdom," she laughs as Harry knocks down their tower. A nanny appears hesitantly at the door, her expression apologetic. "Your Royal Highness, the car is waiting. The hospital engagement?" Diana's face shifts almost imperceptibly, the mask sliding into place. 5 more minutes. Please. She clings to these moments like a drowning woman to driftwood, knowing that once she leaves, the boys will be cared for by others while she smiles for cameras and shakes endless hands. The irony of Diana's position grows sharper each day. She connects with the public in ways the royal family never has, yet this very gift creates tension within the institution. Her genuine empathy threatens the careful emotional distance the monarchy maintains. At a hospital visit, Diana moves through a ward with natural grace, stopping to sit on bed edges and take patients' hands without gloves, a radical gesture in an era when AIDS stigma runs deep. "You're not afraid of me?" a patient asks fearfully, looking at her ungloved hands. "Of you?" Diana replies softly, squeezing his hand. "Never. We're all just people, aren't we?" The moment is captured, syndicated, magnified worldwide. In that simple gesture, Diana breaks a taboo and shifts public perception, but at home, the strain gnaws at her relentlessly. Her popularity surges. Headlines praise her kindness, her style, her modern touch. Wherever she and Charles go, crowds lean toward her side of the street, leaving Charles to wave at disappointed faces. The public's preference becomes impossible to ignore, and Charles's resentment festers like an infected wound. Food becomes Diana's secret language for pain she cannot express publicly. In the gleaming palace kitchens, she binges on whatever she can find, then purges in marble bathrooms, the elegant surroundings making even her illness look refined. The cycle provides the illusion of control in a life where every decision is made by others. Her weight fluctuates dramatically, but palace staff attribute it to stress and new motherhood, never suspecting the deeper truth. At Highgrove House one evening, a small dinner party proceeds with polite conversation, but the atmosphere feels brittle. Diana picks at her food while Charles's attention drifts, his responses automatic and distant. "Your Royal Highness, the crowds in Australia were extraordinary. They seem to adore you both," a guest remarks. Charles's response carries barely concealed bitterness. "Yes, well, they weren't there for me." His eyes flick toward Diana, and she looks down at her untouched plate, understanding the accusation in his tone. Later, in a dimly lit corridor, the words finally tear free. Diana has endured months of Charles's cold shoulders, his mysterious phone calls, his weekend disappearances. The name Camilla haunts every conversation, every silence, every moment of distance between them. "Charles, we need to talk." "Really talk?" Diana intercepts him as he heads toward his study, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. He pauses, his jaw tightening with familiar irritation. "It's late, Diana. I have correspondence to review. It's always late. It's always the wrong time. When is the right time to discuss our marriage?" The hallway seems to narrow around them, portraits of dead royals bearing witness to this modern tragedy. "What exactly do you want me to say?" He sighs heavily. "I want you to say that I'm enough, that you don't need anyone else, that what we have here with our children matters more than whatever you have with her." The silence stretches between them, thick with unspoken truths and accumulated resentments. "You knew who I was when you married me, Diana." His voice is coldly measured. "You knew the complexities of my position. I knew who the world thought you were. I didn't know about Camilla. I didn't know I'd be competing with a ghost for my own husband's attention." This emotional spectacle isn't how we handle things in this family. Personal feelings cannot supersede duty and tradition. Diana's voice breaks. Maybe that's exactly what's wrong with this family. Charles retreats into the familiar refuge of lineage and protocol, while Diana craves something simpler and more dangerous, love without conditions. They sleep under the same roof, but live in separate worlds. His populated by committees and confidential phone calls to Camilla, hers by charity work and desperate late-night conversations with friends who offer sympathy but no solutions. Every day, Diana lives two lives. In one, she is the Princess of Wales, luminous and composed, touching lives and changing perceptions. In the other, she is a young woman drowning beneath the very privilege others envy. Her internal fractures begin surfacing in small, alarming ways, sudden tears during fittings, sharp remarks that slip out at inappropriate moments. Emotional volatility that courtiers label unstable rather than understandable. By late 1984, she has achieved more genuine connection with the public than any royal in modern history. Yet at home, her marriage exists in polite limbo, sustained only by shared children and public expectation. The fairy tale continues for the cameras, but behind palace walls, Diana faces a devastating truth. She is irreplaceable to the public and utterly optional to her own husband. Standing by her bedroom window one evening, watching the dark gardens beyond, Diana sees her own reflection superimposed on the glass, a ghost caught between two worlds. A dangerous thought forms, clear and inevitable. If she cannot be loved inside this crown, perhaps she must learn to live outside it. Chapter 3. The Major Setback or Crisis. By November 20th, 1995, the War of the Waleses has transformed private betrayal into public entertainment, with both sides leaking information to preferred journalists. This chapter centers on Diana's most audacious act of rebellion, the secret Panorama interview that shatters royal protocol forever. Isolated within Kensington Palace, increasingly distrustful of courtiers and their agendas, she is drawn in by journalist Martin Bashir's promises that she can finally tell her own story. The narrative traces her emotional state leading up to the interview, her paranoia about surveillance, her fears for her sons, and her desperate need to reclaim control of a life endlessly narrated by others. On the night of the broadcast, her calm, devastating statements about 3 of us in this marriage, and her battles with bulimia and self-harm electrify the world. The crisis is total. Diana gains unprecedented public sympathy while simultaneously crossing an institutional line that cannot be uncrossed. Public opinion surges in her favor, but behind palace walls, the response is arctic. The chapter ends with the royal household's cold fury, the Queen's silent verdict looming, and Diana sensing, without yet seeing clearly, that the price for her truth will be the final severing of her already broken bond with the crown. Monday, November 20th, 1995. Kensington Palace, London. By 1995, the fairy tale has rotted into something more profitable than love, scandal. British newspapers feast daily on anonymous quotes and sources close to the princess, turning private anguish into public commodity. Headlines scream across breakfast tables worldwide: War of the Waleses, Diana's secret agony, Camilla, the other woman. What was once whispered betrayal becomes theatrical entertainment, and Diana watches herself be dissected and reconstructed daily by people who have never met her. Inside Kensington Palace, the walls seem to close in. The institution that once protected her now treats her as a liability to be managed rather than a person to be supported. Every tear is labeled hysteria, every emotional outburst dismissed as instability. Diana has tried their way: silence, endurance, the stiff upper lip that supposedly defines British royalty. In return, she has received endless humiliation and the cold comfort of public sympathy that cannot alter private misery. Autumn settles over the palace like a gray shawl. Leaves pile against the black railings outside, where photographers linger in parked cars, lenses resting like rifles across their laps. Inside apartment 8, the air hums with tension, phone calls, whispered conversations, the soft tread of staff who have learned to move quietly around the princess's moods. Diana sits in her sitting room, television on but sound muted. Her own face fills the screen in a tabloid recap, flanked by headlines about affairs, mental health, and palace intrigue. The words unstable, unpredictable, obsessed scroll past as if they are weather reports. She watches herself in silence, then reaches for the remote and switches the set off. The sudden quiet is deafening. For years, others have told her story: biographers, unnamed friends, palace officials eager to tilt public perception. Each version edits out a different part of her, leaving behind only a caricature, saint or sinner, manipulator or victim, never simply human. Into this vacuum steps Martin Bashir, a journalist with intense eyes and persuasive words. He offers Diana something she has never had: the opportunity to speak for herself, unfiltered by palace press officers or royal protocols. It is a tempting, dangerous proposition that promises control over her narrative, but threatens to burn bridges she can never rebuild. "Everyone is speaking for you," he says in their first private meeting. "Wouldn't you like, just once, to speak for yourself?" The question lodges itself inside her like a splinter. Friends warn her against it. Palace officials send increasingly frantic messages. The Queen's private secretary expresses concern through carefully worded communications. But the decision ultimately belongs to Diana alone, perhaps the first truly independent choice she has made since walking down the aisle at St. Paul's Cathedral. Tonight, cameras and lights have been smuggled into Kensington Palace with a secrecy usually reserved for state secrets. Curtains are drawn. Only a handful of trusted staff know what is about to happen. Officially, nothing is scheduled. Unofficially, history is waiting in the next room. Diana stands before a mirror, smoothing the lapels of her simple black suit. No tiara, no ceremonial sash, no overt symbols of royal power. The choice is deliberate. She wants to appear as a woman, not an emblem. In the sitting room, the small BBC crew makes final adjustments. Tripods stand where flower arrangements usually sit. Microphone cables snake across the antique rug. The intrusion feels almost sacrilegious and strangely liberating. "Thank you again, ma'am," Bashir says quietly as she enters. "We'll take this at your pace." She nods, already committed. There is no gracious way back from this point. They sit. The camera's red light blinks on. At first, the questions are gentle. Childhood, engagement, the overwhelming pressure of suddenly being the focus of the world's attention. Diana speaks with practiced calm, her voice steady, her hands relaxed in her lap. But something has changed. She is no longer answering on behalf of the institution. She is answering on behalf of herself. Then the questions shift. "Do you think Mrs. Parker Bowles was a factor in the breakdown of your marriage?" Bashir asks. A pause. The room seems to contract around her. This is the moment. "Well," Diana says, her blue eyes level and unflinching, "there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." The words are simple, almost light in tone, but their impact is seismic. Centuries of royal discretion fracture in an instant. She goes further. She speaks of her bulimia not as shame but as symptom. It was a cry for help. "I was trying to make myself sick because I felt sick inside." She acknowledges her own affair, not to scandalize, but to contextualize. A lonely woman, starved of affection, seeking proof she was still desirable, still capable of inspiring love. She speaks of suicide attempts, dark nights, desperate acts carried out in corridors where portraits of monarchs watched impassively. "I don't think many people will want me to be queen," she says at one point, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. "I'd like to be a queen of people's hearts, but I don't see myself being queen of this country." When the interview ends, she is drained, as if something essential has been extracted. The crew packs up in hushed efficiency. The room returns to its usual arrangement, but it is no longer the same room. Words spoken cannot be unsaid. Days later, the broadcast begins. In living rooms, pubs, and hotel bars across the world, people fall silent, drawn in by the familiar face, now speaking unfamiliar truths. At Balmoral, members of the royal family watch in blocks of frozen discomfort. At Buckingham Palace, senior courtiers sit rigid as the princess calmly dismantles the illusion of a united, untroubled monarchy. Behind palace walls, phrases like constitutional implications and irreparable damage are exchanged in tight, controlled voices. The Queen says little, but those closest to her understand. This is a line crossed. Public opinion surges in Diana's favor. She is no longer just a wronged wife, but a survivor, a truth-teller, an underdog battling an ancient, unfeeling machine. But very few remain indifferent. In the quiet that follows, Diana feels both lighter and exposed, like a person who has opened every window in a tightly sealed house, letting in air and, inevitably, storm. Somewhere in the machinery of the monarchy, a response begins to form, cold and precise. She wanted to claim her voice. She has. Now she must face what happens when the crown decides it has had enough of listening. Chapter 4: The Unraveling. Following the Panorama earthquake, the monarchy moves to contain the damage through the ultimate sanction, divorce. July 15, 1996, transforms Diana's royal life into legal history as proceedings formalize her exile from the institution. This chapter details the systematic stripping away of her institutional identity, loss of Herch title, reduced security, and careful isolation as former allies distance themselves. Yet paradoxically, this exile brings unexpected freedom. Diana can finally speak, travel, and align herself with causes without palace approval. Her humanitarian work flourishes, particularly the landmine campaign that alarms governments and defense industries. However, the psychological toll is immense. Relief wars with regret, independence battles with abandonment. As Diana steps further from crown protection, she becomes more vulnerable to forces she doesn't fully comprehend: media moguls, self-styled advisors, and shadowy figures who view her as both asset and liability. The twist reveals that her newfound independence makes her not just irrelevant to the establishment, but potentially dangerous. Her anti-landmine activism threatens powerful interests, her popularity overshadows the monarchy, and her unpredictability worries those who prefer royals to be controllable. The chapter ends with Diana sensing danger approaching, but unable to identify its source, as invisible nets tighten around her with each step toward authentic independence. Monday, July 15, 1996. High Court, London. The divorce of the Prince and Princess of Wales transforms from speculation into legal reality through carefully drafted statements vetted by constitutional experts, press officers, and teams of lawyers who understand that even endings must serve the Crown's interests. Diana arrives at court not as a future queen, but as a woman trading a title for the semblance of peace. Her navy blue suit deliberately simple, her head bowed against shouting reporters who surge forward like a hungry tide. Inside, the proceedings are swift, years of negotiation distilled into signatures and legal formalities. The settlement is substantial: £17 million lump sum, plus $400,000 annually for her private office. She retains Kensington Palace apartments and joint custody of William and Harry. But she loses the style, her Royal Highness, a calculated insult that strips away more than protocol. Without that title, she loses automatic royal protection, diplomatic immunity, and the invisible armor that has always surrounded her. Diana returns to Kensington Palace, where the building looks identical: red brick, white trim, black railings, but something fundamental has shifted. Staff line the hallways with carefully neutral expressions, some genuinely loyal, others already recalculating their career trajectories. In her sitting room, official envelopes wait on the coffee table, physical reminders that even in divorce, she remains tethered to crown bureaucracy. So that's it then, she whispers to herself, sinking into an armchair. In one sense, Diana feels lighter than she has in years. No more pretending her marriage works. No more sharing engagement diaries with a husband who loves someone else. No more biting her tongue when palace officials dismiss her concerns. But she is also unmoored. For 15 years, the monarchy has been both prison and anchor. With the prison doors open, the anchor is slipping away, leaving her adrift in unfamiliar waters. Her social circle contracts as friends deeply tied to the royal household maintain careful distance to avoid appearing to take sides. Others draw closer, intoxicated by her celebrity status, offering flattery where she needs honesty. The media, sensing a new chapter in the Diana story, grows even hungrier for access and images. Free from rigid royal scheduling, Diana throws herself into humanitarian work with renewed passion. She visits landmine victims, holds disfigured hands, sits cross-legged with sick children. The cameras still follow, but now there's less sense of official duty and more personal mission driving her actions. Her anti-landmine campaign particularly alarms certain quarters, not because it's wrong, but because it's effective. When Diana walks through cleared minefields wearing a protective visor, the images sear into global consciousness. Governments take notice, defense industries grumble, and diplomatic cables mention her by name. A protection officer stands before Diana one evening with official papers, his expression carefully neutral. "Ma'am, given the changes to your status, we're reviewing your protection arrangements. There will be adjustments." "What kind of adjustments?" Diana asks. "Reduced personnel, different protocols. You'll still have protection, of course, but the level of coverage will be more proportionate to your current position." Diana understands the euphemism immediately. "You mean less than before." His uncomfortable silence provides the answer. In the vacuum left by institutional support, new figures emerge: spiritual advisors, media consultants, self-styled experts who promise empowerment and control. Some are sincere, others are opportunists drawn to her luminosity like moths to flame. Diana spends long nights on international phone calls, confiding in people whose motives aren't always transparent. She begins speaking of feeling hunted, of cars that follow too closely, of phones that click strangely during conversations. Whether these represent genuine threats, developing paranoia, or a mixture of both remains unclear. What is certain is that her life has become a nexus of competing interests: the palace wanting her contained, the press demanding access, humanitarian organizations seeking her endorsement, and private individuals pursuing their own agendas. Late one night, Diana stands in her darkened sitting room, city lights twinkling beyond the windows. Newspaper clippings about her landmine work scatter across the coffee table alongside headlines about her fashion choices and rumored romances. She picks up one headline: Diana defies crown again. "I'm not defying anything," she laughs bitterly. "I'm just trying to live." Her reflection in the window merges with the urban lights beyond, a ghost caught between two worlds, neither fully inside the palace nor completely outside it. The twist in Diana's unraveling becomes apparent. As she steps further from crown control, she becomes more dangerous to the establishment, not through malice, but through sheer, unscripted popularity. Freed from royal protocol constraints, she can speak freely, travel independently, and align with causes that make governments uncomfortable. Diana shares a quiet meal with a trusted friend one evening, candles flickering between them as they discuss her new reality. "Do you ever wish you could just disappear? Go somewhere nobody knows your name?" her friend asks. Diana smiles sadly. "Every single day. But they'd find me eventually. Cameras have longer memories than people do." She sips her wine thoughtfully before adding, "Sometimes I feel like I've become two different people. There's Diana, who cries alone in empty rooms. And there's Princess Diana, who will never be allowed to die, even after I'm gone." Her friend reaches across the table to squeeze her hand. "You're stronger than you realize." Diana looks away, or more fragile than they understand. Outside the palace gates, paparazzi wait in cars equipped with telephoto lenses. Inside, phones buzz constantly with media inquiries, campaign requests, and social invitations. Somewhere between these two worlds, Diana attempts to construct an identity not defined solely by her ex-husband, her former titles, or her public tragedies. Yet the more she asserts this new self, speaking out, traveling independently, forming new relationships, the more entangled she becomes in networks of influence, money and power she doesn't fully comprehend or control. She senses danger approaching, but cannot identify its source: the palace, angered by her independence; the press, desperate for ever more sensational stories; unstable individuals who write threatening letters; or simply the chaos that follows anyone who refuses to play their assigned role. As 1996 draws to a close, one thing becomes clear: Diana is no longer safely contained within the gilded cage of marriage. She now walks its perimeter, exposed on all sides to forces beyond her understanding or control, while invisible nets tighten with each step toward authentic freedom. Chapter 5. Resolution and Final Reflection. The final chapter traces Diana's last night in Paris and the shockwave of her death, framing the Pont de l'Alma tunnel as both literal site and metaphor for her life's dark, compressed final act. We follow her from the Ritz to the waiting Mercedes, through the brief doomed flight from paparazzi into the underpass, where metal and concrete bring her story to a violent close. Rather than dwell on physical details, the narrative focuses on emotional and symbolic resonance: a woman hounded for years by cameras dying while trying to escape their flash. In the aftermath, public grief floods London, forcing the monarchy to confront its emotional distance and recalibrate its relationship with the people. The script reflects on how wealth both protected and exposed Diana, cushioning her in mansions, while making her every vulnerability profitable. Her legacy, humanizing royalty, destigmatizing mental health, and reshaping humanitarian celebrity, stands in eerie contrast to the loneliness that marked her inner life. The story ends on a quiet, haunting note. In a world that believed it had watched her every moment, no one truly saw how trapped she felt. The tunnel becomes a lasting symbol of the emotional cost of privilege and the limits of power against fate. Sunday, August 31st, 1997. Paris, France. Paris glows at night, a city that makes even sorrow look sophisticated. At the Ritz Hotel, everything gleams: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, gold-trimmed mirrors, reflecting endless versions of wealth back at itself. Diana moves through the lobby accompanied by defied and discreet staff, the air humming with curiosity and calculation. Outside, the usual crowd has gathered. Photographers cluster near the entrance, their cameras hanging at the ready. For them, tonight is another opportunity. New photographs of the world's most famous divorced woman with a billionaire's son. Every glance, every gesture can be turned into a headline. Dinner is quiet, almost ordinary in its conversation. They speak of plans, of a flat in London, of holidays, of expanding her charity work now that she is no longer bound by royal protocol. Imagine, she says, eyes brightening for a moment, a foundation that can move faster than governments. No committees, no courtiers, just help where it's needed. You can do that now, Dodi replies. You're free. Free. The word rests uneasily in the air. Even here, in one of the most expensive hotels in the world, she knows the exit is ringed with strangers who feel entitled to her image. She is tired, not just from the evening, but in a way that runs deeper than bone. Tired of doors that open onto walls of cameras, of vacations that feel like tactical operations, of smiles that must be rationed like state secrets. Yet she is also, strangely, hopeful. At 36, she remains young enough to imagine a second act to her life. As the evening darkens toward midnight, they decide to leave for Dodi's apartment. A decoy car is arranged to distract some of the waiting paparazzi. Another vehicle, a black Mercedes S280, waits at the rear entrance. The plan feels clever in theory: slip out the back, outpace the motorcycles, disappear into the city. In the service corridor, fluorescent lights wash the scene in harsh clarity. There are no chandeliers here, no velvet, just concrete, security staff, the smell of cleaning agents, the underbelly of luxury. Diana slides into the back seat, Dodi beside her. The door shuts with the familiar solid thud of expensive engineering. For a moment, the car is a cocoon, insulating them from shouts, flashes, expectation. Almost there, Dodi murmurs, "We'll lose them." She glances out the window at the narrow slice of night sky visible above the service lane, then turns back, exhaustion etched at the corners of her eyes. "I'd just like to arrive somewhere without being chased." The Mercedes pulls out, gathering speed as it joins the flow of Paris traffic. But the chasing has already begun. Motorcycles rev, following. Scooters weave between cars. Some riders call out. Others lift their cameras, ready to capture whatever comes. Along the Seine, streetlights smear across the windshield in lines of white gold. The car accelerates. The city that has sold so many love stories now plays host to a very different kind of drama, one born less from romance than from relentless hunger for spectacle. The final minutes of Diana's life unfold without cinematic drama, no soundtrack except engine noise, no special effects beyond the ordinary magic of city lights reflected on the Seine. But in retrospect, those minutes acquire unbearable symbolic weight. A princess who spent 16 years being flashed, followed, and framed by lenses now hurtles through darkness in a steel capsule, desperately trying to outrun the very industry that created and ultimately consumed her. The Pont de l'Alma underpass appears ahead, an ordinary slice of city infrastructure. Concrete, shadows, a curve in the road. Nothing about it suggests significance. There is no sign announcing, "Here, a fairy tale ends." They enter the tunnel. In the compressed darkness, everything collapses into a handful of seconds. A flash of headlights, a swerve, the unforgiving angle of a central pillar, the sound of metal folding, glass breaking. Luxury crumples like paper. Wealth, in that instant, offers no advantage over gravity and momentum. In that underground passage beneath a Parisian bridge, the golden threads of wealth, fame, love, and fear that have bound Diana for years snap all at once. The woman who lived in palaces dies in a place without windows, surrounded by the very people whose pursuit brought her there. When sirens arrive, the tunnel is a harsh, echoing space lit by emergency strobes. Paramedics move quickly, their training overriding any awareness of who lies before them. Names are spoken. Confirmed. Treatments begin. At PD Salptrier Hospital, teams assemble. Machines beep, hands work, orders are shouted. For a time, medicine fights to hold back inevitability. But internal damage is too great, too hidden. At 4 a.m, the battle ends. Diana, Princess of Wales, is gone. News radiates outward like shockwaves from an unseen explosion. In London, phones ring in royal residences, journalists' homes, ordinary flats. Television screens flicker as special bulletins interrupt late-night movies and insomniac programs. Diana, Princess of Wales, has died after a car crash in Paris. The words sound unreal, mismatched to the image of the woman everyone has watched grow from teenager to icon. By afternoon, flowers begin to pile against the black railings at Kensington Palace. Bouquets wrapped in cellophane, handwritten notes dampened by drizzle, teddy bears, photographs. The air around the palace gates becomes heavy with the scent of roses and grief. A teenage girl presses a handwritten note against the iron gates, whispering through tears, "You were like one of us, weren't you?" You understood what it felt like to hurt. The monarchy's initially sluggish response faces unprecedented public backlash. Critics demand to know where the Queen is, why flags aren't lowered, whether the crown truly comprehends the woman it has lost, or the public it claims to serve. For the institution, Diana's death represents a crisis of image and relevance. For ordinary people, it constitutes genuine bereavement. At her funeral, the contrast is stark. Westminster Abbey hums with solemn ritual, yet when her brother speaks, his words carry the crackle of unvarnished feeling. She needed no royal title to continue to generate her particular brand of magic, he says, and the congregation, royals, rock stars, ordinary mourners, breaks into applause, usually reserved for performances, not eulogies. If there is a place where her own unspoken reflection might linger, it is not in the palaces or cathedrals, but in that Paris tunnel, a strip of road beneath a city, where anonymity briefly seemed possible, and where everything ended instead. Wealth gave her palaces, gowns, diamonds, the size of raindrops. It gave her access to prime ministers and presidents, private jets and secluded villas. It did not give her the ability to walk down a street without being followed, to love without scrutiny, to grieve without commentary. In the end, the woman the world thought it saw so clearly was, perhaps, the least seen of all. The Pont de l'Alma remains, cars moving through daily, drivers thinking of errands, work, home. Some glance up at the unofficial memorial nearby, a flame repurposed as symbol. Most do not. The city moves on. But Diana's life continues to ask quiet, uncomfortable questions. What is the value of wealth that cannot buy safety for the soul? What is the worth of a crown that cannot protect the hearts beneath it? And what happens to those we turn into symbols when they break under the weight of our expectations? Her story ends in a tunnel, but its echoes remain above ground, in every conversation about mental health, about the press, about the hidden cost of privilege. She once said she'd like to be a queen of people's hearts. She achieved that. The tragedy is that, in the process, her own heart was left exposed, unguarded, and finally, undone.